Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to Language Arts for today. For today, you will need your copy of Little Women. And again, this paper and pencil, perhaps if you have been using that to write down answers. As usual, we're going to go over yesterday's homework and then take a look at today's and get right into our lesson for today. So, with that, I'm going to turn you around. Bump two, sorry. All right, number one, what is the Pickwick Portfolio? It is a newspaper written at home. Two, who were the authors of the Pickwick Portfolio? The March Girls were the authors of the Pickwick Portfolio. We talked about these two in your video yesterday. Okay, so you should have felt pretty confident about them. Three, who was the anniversary ode written by? It was written by Jo. And how do you know that she was the author? I know that she was the author because we talked about a couple of options. She's very literary. She's good at writing. She praises books in it. All those would be good. Who was the history of a squash written by? It was written by Beth. How do you know that she was the author? A lot of great answers yesterday. I know that she was the author because she works out of the home or works in the kitchen. Those would have been great. Or because she's simple and has simple pleasures in life. Things like that. A lot of really good answers there. 7, who wrote the letter that started Mr. Pickwick, sir? We should have said Amy. I know that she was the author because it had really poor punctuation or really poor spelling, really poor grammar. A lot of you all had, right? Because we know that about Amy. She tries to speak in a certain way, but she struggles with it. And the final question, what was the birdhouse used as? It was used as a post office, is correct. Let's take a look at today's homework. So number 1 asks, what experiment did the girls decide to conduct? 2, what did Marmee do with the breakfast that the girls made? 3, what does Jo invite Lori to? 4, how were the strawberries and cream ruined? 5 is a little different, but I said you might say that Jo's dinner was an example of hubris. And so this is the question that you need to answer both parts of. How did she show excessive pride, and what was her downfall? So your answer, she showed excessive pride by or when, and her downfall was when. You want to make sure you answer both parts of that question. 6, what lesson was Mrs. March trying to teach the girls? 7, to which theme might this relate? So this might relate to the theme blank. And then 8, which of the following sentences correctly uses assuaged, which means like to ease or lessen or decrease something. So when someone does something for you and it helps you to decrease a feeling that is an unpleasant feeling. Okay. So for today, we've actually got 2 objectives related directly to those homework questions. Okay, we're going to be identifying hubris and specifically looking for specific textual evidence that supports this idea of hubris. And we're also going to be identifying theme evidence. So to remind you again, in Little Women, we are talking about 3 themes in particular. So as you're answering questions about themes, you need to be picking one of these 3. Societal expectations of women, importance of living a virtuous life, or the relationship between money and happiness. And in this case, it's the question, right? Does money lead to happiness? And different characters certainly have different feelings about it, okay? And remember that following along with the video is going to help a lot as we are trying to process answers, because I'm talking about it as we go, okay? So we're going to pick up with chapter 11 on page 111, the chapter titled Experiments. So go ahead and get there, and we're going to get in. The 1st of June, the Kings are off to the seashore tomorrow, and I'm free. 3 months vacation. How I shall enjoy it, exclaimed Meg, coming home one warm day to find Jo laid upon the sofa in an unusual state of exhaustion, while Beth took off her dusty boots, and Amy made lemonade for the refreshment of the whole party. Aunt March went today, for which, oh, be joyful, said Jo. I was mortally afraid she'd ask me to go with her. If she had, I should have felt as if I ought to do it. But Plumfield is about as gay as a churchyard, you know, and I'd rather be excused. We had a flurry getting the old lady off, and I had a fright every time she spoke to me, for I was in such a hurry to be through that I was uncommonly helpful and sweet, and feared she'd find it impossible to part from me. I quaked till she was fairly in the carriage, and had a final fright, for as it drove off, she popped out her head, saying, Josephine, won't you? I didn't hear any more, for I basely turned and fled. I actually did run and whisked round the corner where I felt safe. Poor old Jo. She came in looking as if bears were after her, said Beth as she cuddled her sister's feet with a motherly air. Aunt March is a regular samphire, is she not? Observed Amy, tasting her mixture critically. She means vampire, not seaweed, but it doesn't matter. It's too warm to be particular about one's parts of speech, murmured Jo. So we see that the family that Meg is a governess for has gone on vacation, for a long vacation. Aunt March, who Jo usually works with, has also gone on a vacation. And Jo kind of fled, hoping that she wouldn't get asked at the last second, like, come with me. Again, Amy makes a mistake, right? She uses a word for a type of seaweed, which is samphire, but what she meant was vampire. So we see that there's kind of like a vacation happening for at least Meg and Jo. But let's keep reading. What shall you do all your vacation? Asked Amy, changing the subject with tact. I shall lie abed late and do nothing, replied Meg. Some of you maybe feel like you're ready to do that again after the week we just had off. From the depths of the rocking chair. I've been routed up early all winter and had to spend my days working for other people, so now I'm going to rest and revel to my heart's content. No, said Jo, that dozy way wouldn't suit me. I've laid in a heap of books, and I'm going to improve my shining hours reading on my perch in the old apple tree, when I'm not having Don't say larks, implored Amy, as a return snub for the samphire correction. I'll say nightingales then, with Laurie. That's proper and appropriate, since he's a warbler. So Amy doesn't want Jo to use slang, so she just picks a different word to do it. Don't let us do any lessons, Beth, for a while, but play all the time and rest as the girls mean to, proposed Amy. Well, I will if Mother doesn't mind. I want to learn some new songs, and my children need fitting up for the summer, her children referring to her dolls. They are dreadfully out of order and really suffering for clothes. May we, Mother? Asked Meg, turning to Mrs. March, who sat sewing in what they called Marmy's corner. You may try your experiment for a week and see how you like it. I think by Saturday night you will find that all play and no work is as bad as all work and no play. Oh dear, no, it will be delicious, I'm sure, said Meg complacently. I now propose a toast, as my friend and partner, Sari Gamp, says. Fun forever and no grubbing, cried Jo, rising, glass in hand, as the lemonade went round. So we see the answer to number 1 here, that they're going to conduct an experiment, right? All of them have agreed on what they're going to do. So take a look back if you're not sure about the answer to number 1. And Marmee has the suspicion that it maybe isn't going to go as well as they think it will. They all drank the lemonade merrily and began the experiment by lounging for the rest of the day. Next morning, Meg did not appear till 10 o'clock. Her solitary, meaning breakfast alone, did not taste nice, and the room seemed lonely and untidy, for Jo had not filled the vases, Beth had not dusted, and Amy's books lay scattered about. Nothing was neat and pleasant but Marmy's corner, which looked as usual, and there Meg sat, to rest and read, which meant yawn and imagine what pretty summer dresses she would get with her salary. Jo spent the morning on the river with Laurie, and the afternoon reading and crying over the wide, wide world up in the apple tree. Beth began by rummaging everything out of the big closet where her family resided. But getting tired before half done, she left her establishment topsy-turvy and went to her music, rejoicing that she had no dishes to wash. Amy arranged her bower, put on her best white frock, smoothed her curls, and sat down to draw under the honeysuckles, hoping someone would see and inquire who the young artist was. As no one appeared but an inquisitive Daddy Longlegs, who examined her work with interest, she went to walk, got caught in a shower, and came home dripping. So they've all kind of started off, but it sounds like all of them have run into a little bit of trouble with their plans of doing nothing all day. At tea time, they compared notes, and all agreed that it had been a delightful, though unusually long day. I know for me sometimes, right, if there's nothing happening, it makes the day almost seem longer. Sometimes you just sit there wondering, when is the day going to be over? Meg, who went shopping in the afternoon and got a sweet blue muslin, had discovered, after she had cut the breadths off the tags, that it wouldn't wash, which mishap made her slightly cross. Jo had burned the skin off of her nose boating and got a raging headache by reading too long. Beth was worried by the confusion of her closet and the difficulty of learning 3 or 4 songs at once, and Amy deeply regretted the damage done her frock, for Katie Brown's party was to be the next day, and now, like Flora McFlimsy, she had nothing to wear. But these were mere trifles, and they assured their mother that the experiment was working finely. She smiled, said nothing, and with Hannah's help did their neglected work, keeping home pleasant and the domestic machinery running smoothly. It was astonishing what a peculiar and uncomfortable state of things was produced by the resting and reveling process. The days kept getting longer and longer. The weather was unusually variable, and so were tempers. An unsettled feeling possessed everyone, and they found plenty of mischief for their idle hands to do. As the height of luxury, Meg put out some of her sewing, and then found time hang so heavily that she fell to snipping and spoiling her clothes in her attempts to furbish them up a la Moffat. Jo read till her eyes gave out, and she was sick of books, got so fidgety that even good natured Laurie had a quarrel with her, and so reduced in spirits that she desperately wished she had gone with Aunt March. Beth got on pretty well, for she was constantly forgetting that it was to be all play and no work, and fell back into her old ways now and then. But something in the air affected her, and more than once her tranquillity was much disturbed, so much so that on one occasion she actually shook poor dear old Joanna and told her she was a fright, so she's shaking her doll. Amy fared worst of all, for her resources were small, and when her sisters left her to amuse and care for herself, she soon found that accomplished and important little self a great burden. She didn't like dolls, fairy tales were childish, and one couldn't draw all the time. Tea parties didn't amount to much, neither did picnics unless very well conducted. If one could have a fine house full of nice girls or go traveling, the summer would be delightful. But to stay at home with 3 selfish sisters and a grown up boy was enough to try the patience of a Boaz, complained Miss Malaprop, after several days devoted to pleasure, fretting, and ennui. So again, we see Amy's misspeaking. She meant to say the patience of a Job, but she says Boaz, and then there's the reference to a character, Miss Malaprop, who is constantly using words incorrectly. So, some of you, maybe if you're honest, would admit that when you have a very long break and there's nothing planned, there's no trips, no events, no nothing that you can do, no parties, no camps, that it starts to get difficult over time, right? You get maybe tired, maybe your siblings start fighting with your siblings and get angry at each other, or you say, "Oh, there's nothing to do." So I think some of you have found maybe over long breaks that definitely starts to happen near the end of the break. You start to have a little bit of irritation because there's this lack of structure and lack of routine and lack of things to do over time. I think especially now, maybe some of you are definitely finding that to be true as we're kind of existing in a state where there's not a lot that we can do outside of our homes. And so the girls are starting to feel that a little bit too much free time, and it's leading to them to get in fights and damage some of their materials and make rash decisions that they regret later. So I think it is a common feeling what is being described. No one would own that they were tired of the experiment, so they aren't going to admit that they don't like the no work, all play experiment. But by Friday night, each acknowledged to herself that she was glad the week was nearly done. Hoping to impress the lesson more deeply, Mrs. March, who had a good deal of humor, resolved to finish off the trial in an appropriate manner. So she gave Hannah a holiday and let the girls enjoy the full effect of the play system. So up to this point, Hannah, their servant or their maid, and Marmee have kind of been keeping up with the task. They've been keeping the house clean, making sure cooking is happening. And Mrs. March decides she's going to really let them experience this. And so Hannah's got a vacation now too, and Mrs. March is going to take a break too. So the girls will really see what happens when no one does any work. When they got up on Saturday morning, there was no fire in the kitchen, no breakfast in the dining room, and no mother anywhere to be seen. Mercy on us, what has happened? Cried Jo, staring about her in dismay. Meg ran upstairs and soon came back again, looking relieved but rather bewildered and a little ashamed. Mother isn't sick, only very tired, and she says she is going to stay quietly in her room all day and let us do the best we can. It's a very queer thing for her to do. She doesn't act a bit like herself. But she says it has been a hard week for her, so we mustn't grumble, but take care of ourselves. That's easy enough, and I like the idea. I'm aching for something to do. That is, some new amusement, added Joe quickly. In fact, it was an immense relief to them all to have a little work, and they took hold with a will, but soon realized the truth of Hannah's saying, housekeeping ain't no joke. There was plenty of food in the larder, and while Beth and Amy set the table, Meg and Joe got breakfast, wondering as they did so why servants ever talked about hard work. Interesting. So they're setting off thinking, what is all this complaining about how difficult it is to keep the house up and running? I have a little feeling that maybe this is some foreshadowing. Maybe this is some hubris, but we'll see. I shall take some breakfast up to Mother, though she said we were not to think of her, for she'd take care of herself, said Meg, who presided and felt quite matronly behind the teapot. So a tray was fitted out before anyone began, and taken up with the cook's compliments. The boiled tea was very bitter, the omelette scorched, and the biscuits speckled with saleratus. But Mrs. March received her repast, her food, with thanks, and laughed heartily over it after Joe was gone. So the breakfast that they made really isn't very good. Poor little souls, they will have a hard time, I'm afraid, but they won't suffer, and it will do them good, she said, producing the more palatable viands with which she had provided herself, and disposing of the bad breakfast so that their feelings might not be hurt. A motherly little deception for which they were grateful. This is the answer to question 2. So it says that she had kind of brought up some more able to be eaten, some edible food for herself, and disposed of the bad breakfast. Many were the complaints below, and great the chagrin of the head cook at her failures. Never mind, I'll get the dinner and be servant. You be mistress, keep your hands nice, see company, and give orders, said Joe, who knew still less than Meg about culinary affairs. This obliging offer was gladly accepted, and Margaret retired to the parlor, which she hastily put in order by whisking the litter under the sofa and shutting the blinds to save the trouble of dusting. Joe, with perfect faith in her own powers and a friendly desire to make up the quarrel, immediately put a note in the office inviting Laurie to dinner. So at this point, or at this time, this is referring to like a lunch. They're talking about dinner meaning lunch, and then supper would be the last meal of the day. So just so we're not confused. You'd better see what you have got before you think of having company, said Meg, when informed of the hospitable but rash act. We also just got the answer to number 3, and we're kind of getting some ideas about hubris here. Oh, there's corned beef and plenty of potatoes, and I shall get some asparagus and a lobster for a relish, as Hannah says. We'll have lettuce and make a salad. I don't know how, but the book tells. I'll have blancmange and strawberries for dessert, and coffee too, if you want to be elegant. Don't try too many messes, Joe, for you can't make anything but gingerbread and molasses candy fit to eat. I wash my hands of the dinner party, and since you have asked Laurie on your own responsibility, you may just take care of him. I don't want you to do anything but be civil to him and help to the pudding. You'll give me your advice if I get in a muddle, won't you? Asked Joe, rather hurt. Yes, but I don't know much, except about bread and a few trifles. You had better ask Mother's leave before you order anything, returned Meg prudently. Of course I shall. I'm not a fool. And Joe went off in a huff at the doubts expressed of her powers. Get what you like and don't disturb me. I'm going out to dinner and can't worry about things at home, said Mrs. March when Joe spoke to her. I never enjoyed housekeeping, and I'm going to take a vacation today and read and write, go visiting, and amuse myself. The unusual spectacle of her busy mother rocking comfortably and reading early in the morning made Joe feel as if some natural phenomenon had occurred. For an eclipse, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption would hardly have seemed stranger. They're thinking, Marmy's taking a break. She never takes a break. Everything is out of sorts somehow, she said to herself, going downstairs. There's Beth crying. That's a sure sign that something is wrong with this family. If Amy is bothering, I'll shake her. Feeling very much out of sorts herself, Joe hurried into the parlor to find Beth sobbing over Pip, the canary, who lay dead in the cage with his little claws pathetically extended, as if imploring the food for want of which he had died. It's all my fault. I forgot him. There isn't a seed or a drop left. Oh, Pip, how could I be so cruel to you?" cried Beth, taking the poor thing in her hands and trying to restore him. So while they were taking a vacation, they forgot to feed the pet bird, and the bird died of starvation. Joe peeped into his half open eye, felt his little heart, and finding him stiff and cold, shook her head and offered her domino box for a coffin. "Put him in the oven, and maybe then he'll get warm and revive," said Amy hopefully. "He's been starved, and he shan't be baked now he's dead. I'll make him a shroud, and he shall be buried in the garden, and I'll never have another bird, ever, my Pip, for I am too bad to own one," murmured Beth, sitting on the floor with her pet folded in her hands. "The funeral shall be this afternoon, and we will all go. Now don't cry, Bethy. It's a pity, but nothing goes right this week, and Pip has had the worst of the experiment. Make the shroud and lay him in my box, and after the dinner party we'll have a nice little funeral," said Joe, beginning to feel as if she had undertaken a good deal. Leaving the others to console Beth, she departed to the kitchen, which was in a most discouraging state of confusion. Putting on a big apron, she fell to work and got the dishes piled up ready for washing, when she discovered that the fire was out. "Here's a sweet prospect," muttered Joe, slamming the stove door open and poking vigorously among the cinders. Having rekindled the fire, she thought she would go to the market while the water heated. So they won't have running water at this time, so she needs to heat the water so that then she can wash the dishes. So the water has to be on the fireplace, on the stove fireplace, in order to heat up. The walk revived her spirits, and flattering herself that she had made good bargains, she trudged home again, after buying a very young lobster, some very old asparagus, and 2 boxes of acid strawberries. In other words, Joe has not purchased very good groceries. By the time she got cleared up, the dinner arrived and the stove was red hot. Hannah had left a pan of bread to rise. Meg had worked it up early, set it on the hearth for a second rising, and forgotten it. Meg was entertaining Sally Gardner in the parlor when the door flew open and a floury, crocky, flushed and disheveled figure appeared, demanding tartly, "I say, isn't bread riz enough when it runs over the pans?" So if you've ever made homemade bread, especially if you're making it like very much from scratch, although there's different recipes now, but you mix it and then you have to let it rise and then you kind of work it down again and then you have to let it rise again, but you don't want it to rise too high because then it starts to become this like massive unwieldy loaf that becomes hard to cook. And so that's what happened. They forgot about it and now it's falling over the side of the pan. Sally began to laugh, but Meg nodded and lifted her eyebrows as high as they would go, which caused the apparition to vanish and put the sour bread into the oven without further delay. Mrs. March went out, after peeping here and there to see how matters went, also saying a word of comfort to Beth, who sat making a winding sheet, while the dear departed lay in state in the domino box. A strange sense of helplessness fell upon the girls as the gray bonnet vanished round the corner, and despair seized them when a few minutes later Miss Crocker appeared and said she'd come to dinner. So again, at this time, it would not be uncommon for somebody to just pop over for lunch, right? And say, "Hey, I'm here." And they assume you're going to have it, so then people might just come over to visit and eat with them. So they now find that Miss Crocker has shown up to eat at their house. Now, this lady was a thin yellow spinster with a sharp nose and inquisitive eyes, who saw everything and gossiped about all she saw. They disliked her, but had been taught to be kind to her, simply because she was old and poor and had few friends. So Meg gave her the easy chair and tried to entertain her while she asked questions, criticized everything, and told stories of the people whom she knew. Language cannot describe the anxieties, experiences, and exertions which Joe underwent that morning, and the dinner she served up became a standing joke. Fearing to ask any more advice, she did her best alone and discovered that something more than energy and goodwill is necessary to make a cook. She boiled the asparagus for an hour, way too long, and was grieved to find the heads cooked off and the stalks harder than ever. The bread turned black, way too long cooking, for the salad dressing so aggravated her that she had let everything else go till she had convinced herself that she could not make it fit to eat. The lobster was a scarlet mystery to her, but she hammered and poked till it was unshelled and its meager proportions concealed in a grove of lettuce leaves. The potatoes had to be hurried, not to keep the asparagus waiting, and were not done at last. So she overcooked The asparagus overcooked the bread. She damaged the lobster while trying to get the meat out. She undercooked the potatoes. The blancmange was lumpy, and the strawberries not as ripe as they had looked, having been skillfully deaconed. So she kind of got duped at the grocer and ended up buying bad strawberries. Well, they can eat beef and bread and butter if they are hungry. Only it's mortifying to have to spend your whole morning for nothing, thought Jo, as she rang the bell half an hour later than usual and stood, hot, tired, and dispirited, surveying the feast spread for Laurie, accustomed to all sorts of elegance, and Miss Crocker, whose curious eyes would mark all failures, and whose tattling tongue would report them far and wide. Poor Jo would gladly have gone under the table, as one thing after another was tasted and left. While Amy giggled, Meg looked distressed, Miss Crocker pursed up her lips, and Laurie talked and laughed with all his might to give a cheerful tone to the festive scene. Jo's one strong point was the fruit, for she had sugared it well. So after all of the mess, right, Jo serves the fruit and she decides just heaps on sugar, right? That'll make it taste better if I just put a bunch of sugar on. So she had sugared it well and had a pitcher of rich cream to eat it with. Her hot cheeks cooled a trifle, and she drew a long breath as the pretty glass plates went round, and everyone looked graciously at the little rosy islands floating in a sea of cream. Miss Crocker tasted first, made a wry face, and drank some water hastily. Jo, who refused, thinking there might not be enough, for they dwindled sadly after the picking over, glanced at Laurie, but he was eating away manfully, though there was a slight pucker about his mouth, and he kept his eye fixed on his plate. Amy, who was fond of delicate fare, took a heaping spoonful, choked, hid her face in her napkin, and left the table precipitately. So there's something wrong with the strawberries, though she doesn't know what yet. Oh, what is it? Exclaimed Jo, trembling. Salt instead of sugar. And the cream is sour, replied Meg with a tragic gesture. So the cream has gone bad, and remember how I said she was heaping on sugar to make it taste better? She actually was heaping on salt. Jo uttered a groan and fell back in her chair, remembering that she had given a last hasty powdering to the berries out of one of the two boxes on the kitchen table and had neglected to put the milk in the refrigerator. She turned scarlet and was on the verge of crying when she met Laurie's eyes, which would look merry in spite of his heroic efforts. The comical side of the affair suddenly struck her, and she laughed till the tears ran down her cheeks. So did everyone else, even Croaker, as the girls called the old lady, Miss Crocker. And the unfortunate dinner ended gaily with bread and butter, olives, and fun. So as we're reflecting on, first of all, we just talked about how the strawberries and cream were ruined, but then number 5, you could argue that this was a little bit of an example of mild hubris for Jo. So the question again, remember, is how did she show excessive pride, which her conversation with Meg early on really kind of highlights that. And then what was her downfall? So think about making sure to answer both parts of that question and restating the question, but I think we've got the evidence we need for that now. I haven't strength of mind enough to clear up now, so we will sober ourselves with a funeral, said Jo, as they rose. And Miss Crocker made ready to go, being eager to tell the new story at another friend's dinner table. So having not had much of a dinner, she's going to go eat somewhere else and probably share the story. They did sober themselves for Beth's sake. Laurie dug a grave under the ferns in the grove. Little Pip was laid in, with many tears by his tender-hearted mistress, and covered with moss, while a wreath of violets and chickweed hung on the stone which bore his epitaph, composed by Jo while she struggled with the dinner. Here lies Pip March, who died the 7th of June, loved and lamented sore, and not forgotten soon. At the conclusion of the ceremonies, Beth retired to her room, overcome with emotion and lobster. But there was no place of repose, for the beds were not made, and she found her grief much assuaged by beating up pillows and putting things in order. So maybe you can understand, right? Kind of hitting things when you're really frustrated maybe helps. Punching some pillows. She's kind of vigorously fluffing the pillows to get a little of her anger out or frustration. Meg helped Jo clear away the remains of the feast, which took half the afternoon and left them so tired that they agreed to be contented with tea and toast for supper. Laurie took Amy to drive, which was a deed of charity, for the sour cream seemed to have had a bad effect upon her temper. Mrs. March came home to find the three older girls hard at work in the middle of the afternoon, and a glance at the closet gave her an idea of the success of one part of the experiment. Before the housewives could rest, several people called. So people are showing up again to visit them, and there was a scramble to get ready to see them. Then tea must be got, errands done, and one or two necessary bits of sewing neglected to the last minute. As twilight fell, dewy and still, one by one they gathered on the porch where the June roses were budding beautifully, and each groaned or sighed as she sat down, as if tired or troubled. "What a dreadful day this has been," began Joe, usually the first to speak. "It has seemed shorter than usual, but so uncomfortable," said Meg. "Not a bit like home," added Amy. "It can't seem so without Marmee and little Pip," sighed Beth, glancing with full eyes at the empty cage above her head. "Here's mother, dear, and you shall have another bird tomorrow if you want it." As she spoke, Mrs. March came and took her place among them, looking as if her holiday had not been much pleasanter than theirs. "Are you satisfied with your experiment, girls, or do you want another week of it?" she asked, as Beth nestled up to her and the rest turned toward her with brightening faces, as flowers turned toward the sun. "I don't," cried Joe decidedly. "Nor I," echoed the others. "You think, then, that it is better to have a few duties and live a little for others, do you?" "Lounging and larking doesn't pay," observed Joe, shaking her head. "I'm tired of it and mean to go to work at something right off." "Suppose you learn plain cooking. That's a useful accomplishment which no woman should be without," said Mrs. March, laughing inaudibly at the recollection of Joe's dinner party, for she had met Miss Crocker and heard her account of it. So Marmie's kind of teasing Joe. Joe's like, "I need to get busy doing something," and she says, "Oh, maybe you could learn to do a little cooking." "Mother, did you go away and let everything be just to see how we'd get on?" cried Meg, who had had suspicions all day. "Yes, I wanted you to see how the comfort of all depends on each doing her share faithfully." This is getting at our answer to question 6. "While Hannah and I did your work, you got on pretty well, though I don't think you were very happy or amiable. So I thought, as a little lesson, I would show you what happens when everyone thinks only of herself. Don't you feel that it is pleasanter to help one another, to have daily duties which make leisure sweet when it comes, and to bear and forbear, that home may be comfortable and lovely to us all?" "We do, mother, we do," cried the girls. "Then let me advise you to take up your little burdens again, for though they seem heavy sometimes, they are good for us, and lighten as we learn to carry them. Work is wholesome, and there is plenty for everyone. It keeps us from ennui and mischief." Ennui is like boredom to the point of like it becomes like overwhelming and makes you very sad or depressed. "It keeps us from ennui and mischief, is good for health and spirits, and gives us a sense of power and independence better than money or fashion." "We'll work like bees and love it too. See if we don't," said Joe. "I'll learn plain cooking for my holiday task, and the next dinner party I have shall be a success. I'll make the set of shirts for father, instead of letting you do it, Marmee. I can and I will, though I'm not fond of sewing. That will be better than fussing over my own things, which are plenty nice enough as they are," said Meg. "I'll do my lessons every day, and not spend so much time with my music and dolls. I am a stupid thing, and ought to be studying, not playing," was Beth's resolution, while Amy followed their example by heroically declaring, "I shall learn to make buttonholes, and attend to my parts of speech." "Very good. Then I am quite satisfied with the experiment, and fancy that we shall not have to repeat it. Only don't go to the other extreme and delve like slaves. Have regular hours for work and play. Make each day both useful and pleasant, and prove that you understand the worth of time by employing it well. Then youth will be delightful, old age will bring few regrets, and life become a beautiful success in spite of poverty. We'll remember, mother." And they did. So Mrs. March is kind of getting into this whole thing with them about balance, I guess is what it comes down to, balance, which um, I really connect to temperance, right? This idea of temperance, so that you don't want to be too far on either extreme, right? Temperance is about really being in the middle. And you may have heard the quote, temperance is best, right? It's all about kind of being in the middle, right? You don't want to be too strict with your work or too free with your play. It's about really being in the middle of it. So kind of all doing their part a little bit brings joy to everybody. I think about it like the difference between, and maybe during distance learning, this is a connection that you can make. Doing your homework a little bit every day can make it a lot more manageable than trying to do all of it. Like if you waited until Friday to try to do all the week's homework, that would make it really unpleasant and really hard. And maybe you would have enjoyed the days leading up to that, right? Maybe you would enjoy the process, but eventually, right, that becomes an overwhelming amount of homework, classwork to try and do. And so that's really what Marmie's talking about, right? Doing a little bit every day, using your temperance, having a balance. And she talks too also about the fortitude of like picking up their burdens again and keeping with work, okay, will help and make everyone happier. Okay, and then the next question on there is about the themes. And again, if you've been kind of listening to the words that I've been sprinkling throughout, this should really help us to figure out which of these it's talking about, right? I've been talking about temperance and fortitude as I go, right? And even justice as you're considering doing for others, not just for yourself, right? Thinking of others. So, which of our themes would really connect to that? Thinking of the three options, okay? And then assuage. The book used assuaged as Beth assuaged her frustrations by kind of vigorously making up the beds and pounding the pillows into place. So, which of those seems to be the best for the definition of assuaged? I'm really eager to hear about your hubris reflections related to Jo as she's embarking on this dinner journey of hers, and also your theme reflections. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out, fifth graders. I'm here to help. See ya.